attention.
Two more Ukrainian jets shot down in eastern Ukraine today. Vladimir Putin out blaming the West and Ukraine. We're back with the panel. Steve, you can hear some bipartisan angst, obviously, about President Obama's schedule continuing. But what about the situation in Ukraine?
Well, good for Dianne Feinstein for actually saying something like that. She'll no doubt be getting calls from the White House. She's absolutely right. The president needs to be paying more attention. The fact that he's not paying attention, I think, gives a de facto green light to somebody like Vladimir Putin, who's supporting these Russian separatists. The big two pieces of news today were that the Ukrainian fighters were shot down, as you suggest, and that Russian troops were moving again to the Ukrainian border. This is clear that Vladimir Putin doesn't see anything the U.S. has done since the shoot down of the Malaysian Airlines plane as having any real consequences. He's not afraid of the consequences. He's not afraid of the West, and he doesn't think that this president is taking this crisis seriously. I think he has good reason to come to that conclusion.
A.B.
Well, I don't think there's anything President Obama is going to do militarily that would be supported by this country. If you look at recent polls of the last just week alone, you see Americans thinking that we should be doing less to counter Russian aggression, which is really quite stunning. President Obama has to use rhetoric or sanctions. He's tried on his own to use sanctions. He hasn't gone far enough, of course, with what they call sectoral or level 3 sanctions that would really, really hurt. But he was on the phone with President Putin the day that the airliner went down because Putin was upset with what he sees as another step towards painful sanctions. He can't convince the Europeans yet to get on board unless he changes our energy policy. It's hard to imagine how he can make Putin hurt. And it looks like with 2 down jets and an insurgent admitting today that they did have the Buk missile technology and more of an incursion into eastern Ukraine, Putin will do whatever he wants. So President Obama should probably be using rhetoric and not be at fundraisers. I think Putin watches that too. And I believe in optics. I think he should be back here talking about it. But frankly, until the Europeans get on board, I think his hands are tied.
Charles, I want to turn you to Israel and Hamas, the Gaza Strip. The UN Secretary General out with a statement after, and we talked about on the show, these rockets found in a UN school. Here's what the Secretary General put out today. Now the rockets are missing. The Secretary General is alarmed to hear rockets were placed in a UN RWA school in Gaza and that subsequently these have gone missing. He expresses his outrage and regret at placing of weapons in a UN-administered school. The Secretary General calls on all of those who have any influence over militant groups to send an unmistakable message that this is unacceptable. Charles?
Look, this statement tells you all you need to know about how corrupt and corrupted the UN is in the conflict between Israel and the Arabs. Number one, the missiles haven't gone missing. We know what happened. The UN workers returned them to the authorities, quote unquote, which means Hamas, they'll be used against innocent Jews. Second, the expression of outrage that he is shocked to discover there are missiles in a UN school is preposterous. How do you smuggle 20 missiles into a classroom? Can you imagine the principal in the U.S. saying, well, I really am not sure how they got there? What did the Hamas do? Put them in a golf bag, walk them in and say he's preparing for the Gaza Open? The UN workers, UNRWA, have collaborated with Hamas for years and years. They know that there are missiles in the schools, in the hospitals, in the mosques, and they know what's going to happen. Kids will be killed, and that's going to be on television. And the Secretary General complains that this was smuggling into the schools. The problem isn't smuggling. The problem is that the use of human shields is a violation of the fundamental law of war. That's what's happening, and the UN is aiding and abetting.
Another thing, Charles, raised some eyebrows at the UN today, and that is that the UN Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, is flying around for emergency meetings on a plane funded by Qatar, the country of Qatar, which is, a lot of people know, is a supporter of Hamas. So why would the UN take the plane provided by Qatar? Because the UN doesn't even care about appearances anymore. The bias it has against Israel, its Human Rights Commission today said it was going to open an inquiry into the human rights violations of the Israelis when the use of human shields, the rocketing of innocents is what's happening on the part of Hamas. We hear almost nothing about that. The UN is so committed to the Palestinian cause, and in this case the Hamas cause, that it doesn't even care about appearances. And after all, who but you
and a few other outlets are going to report it. How many have reported the rockets in the school?
I don't know, but it's not many, I guarantee you that.